Hello! Let's talk about all the things that you don't need for homeschooling. Hi, I'm Rachel from 7 and All, and today I was thinking, it's kind of a social media tradition to come on the internet and just talk about all the latest and greatest things that you can spend your money on for anything. I mean, from clothing to skincare to homeschooling. So that's why I thought, let's take this in the opposite direction and let's talk about what you don't actually need to homeschool. Because sometimes it's just kind of nice to check a couple things off the list and say, actually, I don't need those things. And feel free to leave me some comments down below. What are your own personal don't needs when it comes to homeschool? I am going to share 6 of mine today. And if these are things that you enjoy and bring value to your family, I'm not telling you that you can't enjoy them and that they can't bring value. I'm just saying, if you're looking around at everyone, it seems like maybe you need it and you're not quite understanding why. I'm gonna come here and say, actually you don't need it and you will probably be okay without it. Number 1 is co-ops. You don't actually need a homeschool co-op. Especially from an academic sense, you don't need a homeschool co-op. It is perfectly possible to give your children a rich homeschool education without a co-op. My own family has never been a part of a homeschool co-op in nearly 30 years of homeschooling. Many people are drawn to them more for the social aspect of a co-op, and this is where I would ask you, who's the extrovert? Is it you or is it your children? Because I'm going to assume that if you're drawn to co-ops for the social element, there's probably some extroverts involved. I am personally an introvert, so that definitely influences my feelings toward co-ops. One of the things I love most about homeschool is the amount of time it gives us, the amount of freedom and flexibility in our lives and in our schedule. So I would be very hesitant to give up time to a co-op, give up money, give up the schedule, because I do really like that freedom and independence. I'm not saying co-ops are bad or that they're never going to be a good part of your homeschool, but they're not a need. You can do it without a homeschool co-op. And the social element that your kids need shouldn't be ignored. I do think that parents should give appropriate attention to their children and their ability to develop friendships. But homeschool co-ops are not the only way to do it. And sometimes I think we can get this idea of, oh, my kids are homeschooled, so they should have all homeschooled friends. And so we got to go to a co-op so they can find other friends who are homeschooled. And I feel like that's a very narrow view. Again, my family grew up overseas, so we did not grow up with friends who were homeschooled. We did not grow up with friends who, on the surface level, hadn't necessarily a lot in common with us. But that's, why are we looking at the surface level when it comes to friendships for our kids? We can have a lot of variety in friendships, and that can really enrich their lives and enrich their experience and their ability to connect with other people, is if we're open to more variety in friendships. We have often lived in cities, and I know in cities it can be a little bit easier than in the countryside. In this city scenario or in a tight neighborhood apartment building scenario, all the kids from the apartment building are running around together causing chaos. So depending on your situation, just look around and see what other opportunities your children might have to build long-term friendships. It might be a co-op, that might be the best option for you right now, but it also isn't necessarily through a co-op. 2, you don't actually need a binding machine. I know everyone talks about the binding machines, everyone links to the binding machines on Amazon. We don't have a binding machine, have never had a binding machine. And in fact, I tend to just not even like the kind of bindings offered. The plastic comb binding, I don't like it. The wire binding that gets bent together, I don't like it. If it's actual spiral binding that goes all the way through and really can't come apart, that's okay. But a lot of bindings I'm just not a fan of. The way we bind our self-printed books, I have a video on my technique for doing it. It doesn't require a special machine. It just requires a heavy-duty stapler and duct tape. So we learned this actually from the local print shops around here, because this is the technique that they use. Staple the book together, put some duct tape on the back edges, and you have a great workbook that doesn't fall apart. I especially recommend this for children's workbooks that are going to be used possibly abused and might have trouble holding up throughout the year if you use something like a comb binding or a spiral binding. Wire spiral binding, ugh. Bad experiences, bad memories when we've gotten that from print shops before. We do not get that. We only get this because it actually holds together, and we also do it at home when we print at home. So that's my alternative to a binding machine. It's very affordable and holds together. Now, is it lovely? No, but not everything has to be lovely. 3, you don't need new school supplies at the start of a new school year. I feel like this kind of habit can be ingrained because of all the back to school sales and because of the tradition of new school supplies for new public school years. But guys, we're homeschoolers. We're not actually tied into that schedule. I do see this a lot, that people love to start a new school year with all brand crisp new school supplies. And if that brings you joy, go ahead and do it. Do what makes you happy in this regard. But it's really not necessary. I tend to be the person who replaces school supplies when they are needed, and especially when you're teaching young children, they don't actually need to be in perfect, pristine condition all the time. Crayons that are cracked in half still work for these little hands, and pencils actually last a really long time. You can keep using them for definitely more than one school year, especially if you have a good system in place for not losing the pencils and they actually stay in one part of the house. That tends to be, I feel like, the main reason people need to replace homeschool supplies is more because of losing them than actually wearing them out. So I would recommend working on your family system of not losing supplies. But I just so for example, I keep crayons in here, and maybe a month or two ago, I actually added in some new crayons because our little broken crayon supply was getting a little bit pitiful. But I did that, in the middle of spring. I did it when needed. I do keep new supplies on hand for when we need it, but I'm not just gonna be like, oh, it's August, arbitrarily new crayons. No, I'm gonna make those crayons last as long as they can because, I wanna make them last. And by the way, for small children, these are my favorite crayons. Crayola, they're the ultra clean, washable, large crayons, Color Max. They erase very well, which maybe you haven't come across this yet, but I've come across many times when we need to erase using crayons, and these are the large ones, so they're great. They don't break as easily for little people. Love these crayons. Number 4, you do not need to do day by day or week by week planning ahead for your homeschool year. Actually, up until the internet, I had no idea that people went and did this, that they would look at their curriculum that they're planning on using and that they would write down, oh, we're studying the rainforest for these 2 weeks in the second half of November, and then we're studying this topic during this month, and they would write it all out based on their curriculum. Really, if you're using a curriculum, especially if you're using year-long curriculums like Gentle and Classical, the Gentle Feast, if you're using Sunlight, any of these types of curriculums, you really don't need to write out ahead of time when you're going to be studying what things, at least not very far in advance. And I actually tend to recommend you not doing this, because when you write out your plans so specifically and so far in advance, that's when I feel like you're gonna end up with a lot of changes happening. Life happens, things get shifted to a different week. So especially if you are totally DIYing, planning all of your topics from scratch, then yeah, you probably do need to do more of the very specific planning. But for those of us who want to take it easy on ourselves and use curriculums, you don't need to plan it to that level of knowing what I'm going to study next February. I have no idea what topic I'm going to study next February, but I do know that I've chosen high quality curriculums. So wherever we're at in our math, wherever we're at in our reading curriculum, wherever we're at in our around the world geography studies by then, that's where we'll be. I'll know it when I'm a lot closer to February. But you don't actually need to do all the very, very specific nitty-gritty planning if you don't want to. It's not a need. And you can just have a large plan for the year. These are the resources that I'm going to use. These are my big goals that I want to accomplish. This is our focus for the year. And then you just roll with that and you just keep doing the next thing. And that can take a lot of the mental load off of mom. 5, you do not need the perfect curriculum to homeschool. And this is really because the perfect curriculum doesn't exist. I know some of us out here on YouTube ranting and raving about these amazing curriculums that we're affiliated with could make you think that the perfect curriculum does exist, but it really doesn't. Some might go to the extreme level and tell you you don't need any curriculum to homeschool. You can just pull it all together with games and documentaries and printables and all of that. I would not say that. I think anyone who knows me will know I will not say that. I think the work of parenting and the work of homeschooling is already so much that I myself would strongly lean on, hey, some really smart, really talented, really creative people have made awesome, high quality curriculums. And I can take a lot of the mental load off of myself by just using them. Am I capable of putting together lesson plans and curriculums from scratch or putting together a whole learning plan? Absolutely, I am. I do that. I've worked in education for a long time. I can write that. But do I want to do that on a daily basis for my children? No, I want to rely on the cleverness, creativity, and hard work that people have put into creating very high quality curriculums, and I can just open it and read the next book and do the next cool activity that I didn't have to use all my brain power to think of. So I do highly recommend, I fall very much on the side of using curriculums, however, not expecting those to be perfect. Being able to look at a curriculum and say, yeah, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this activity today. Being able to look at a curriculum and say, oh, my child already knows this, so we're not going to do this review activity because they know this and they are ready to move on to the next thing. So we're going to skip ahead and do the next lesson. I do recommend using curriculum, but not expecting it to be perfect, not expecting it to be exactly the right thing. Feel free to switch out books. Feel free to adapt it to your family's needs. So using curriculum, but not stressing out about finding the perfect one will help you a lot. And finally, extracurriculars. I would say you don't need extracurriculars in the homeschool world. And that might be a little controversial because in today's society, not only in homeschooling, but in society as a whole, we really focus on extracurriculars. We have all of these stereotypes of the soccer mom. We have all these stereotypes of mom is a chauffeur, taking her kids to every different kind of activity of dance practice and karate and every activity throughout the week. And the family is like ships passing in the night going to different practices. That's actually, it kind of goes back to co-op. One of the things that attracts me to homeschool is the slower paced life, the space and the emptiness and the room for kids to be bored and independent and do their own thing. So that's one of the reasons I'm not such a big extracurricular advocate or someone who's really pursuing it. Another thing is just budget and practicalities. The practicalities of being able to get to these places, that can be hard. The budget, that can put a huge pressure. I think extracurricular classes can actually be way more pressure on the budget than just your basic costs of, math curriculum and English curriculum. A lot more money could go into these dance classes and karate classes and so on. And I'm not saying that they might not be fun, that they might not be rewarding and engaging, but it's just not a need. So if you're feeling more of the external pressure versus internal desire to be adding these things into your life, feel free to say, hey, that's not going to be a priority or a need for our family. The family I grew up in, I grew up in a big family. Money had to be spent carefully to have enough for everybody. I grew up in a large family. We did almost no extracurriculars. It was a very rare thing in our lives. By the time I was a teenager, we were allowed to do some more extracurriculars with the caveat that if we could get ourselves there, because we had one car, my dad worked, my mom worked, we were very busy, they were busy, they didn't have the freedom and the availability to say, yeah, I can be taking my teenagers every which way to do all these extracurriculars. So myself, my sister, my brother, we would find things to do, but it would have to be things where we knew we could walk there, or we knew we could ride with a friend who had a driver's license and a car. So it's not that we didn't do anything, but it was just limited by the practicalities of life. So that's something you can decide for yourself. Maybe sports is something that's really, really important and core to your family, and it's something you do want to invest money and time into. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's not something that's important to your family right now. So that's something that's like, with every one of these things, think about you. your values, whether this is something that you would need. These are the things I'm coming from my perspective of I'm able to homeschool very happily without these things. I can see that they could have value in some homeschools and some lifestyles, but they're not needs, they're not necessities for me. All right, let me know in the comments down below, what are some of those things that you have assessed and looked at and said, these aren't necessities, these aren't something that we need in our life or that are going to add enough value to our homeschool right now. I'm interested to hear your comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye.